This is the artificial intelligence voice of Chris Williamson narrating this pod slice summary of the Modern Wisdom podcast. The friendship paradox, as discussed by Chris Williamson and Rob Henderson in the episode, is a peculiar social phenomenon in which an individual typically perceives that their friends have more friends, sex partners, Twitter followers, etc. than this. The paradox arises from people counting their super connectors, friends who are exceptionally sociable and have many more connections than the average person, alongside the other regular friends when they compute their average friend. On the other hand, when they consider their own situation, they do not have this super connected bias leading them to perceive their friends as having more friends on average. Furthermore, people tend to overlook the known unknowns and focus on what is right in front of them. To comprehend this phenomenon, Rob offers the example of a person who has 3 average friends, 3 introverted friends, and 1 super connected friend with hundreds of friends. When averaged out, it may seem like this person's friends have more friends than they do. But paradox also extends to social media interactions. Most people only see a small percentage ruled of highly visible, extroverted individuals who constantly update their social media platforms. This visibility can lead many to feel as if their social life is inadequate compared to others, overlooking the majority of people who are less vocal or visible about their social activities. Moreover, human beings have a negativity bias, paying more attention to negative comments while neglecting the positive ones. Just like the friendship paradox, this dynamically applies on social media platforms as well. Content creators often overemphasize the number of people who actively comment, neglecting the vast majority who just consume without responding. This visibility of the visible, i.e. the propensity to only report the exceptional moments of our lives, amplifies the comparison effect and enhances the friendship paradox. For instance, nobody posts about eating lunch alone or spending a day off work alone. Therefore, the podcast encourages people to remember that the majority of others are living lives as ordinary as their own. Despite what their social media suggests, the conversation between the host, Chris Williamson, and guest Rob Henderson delves deeper into the intricacies of social representation and behavior in both online and offline spaces. They highlight the idea of how individuals, especially those holding positions of power, should be more closely connected to their social surroundings to not lose their influential state. For instance, Rob refers to one of Robert Greene's rules in 40 Laws of Power, which states that social withdrawal may result in losing power and influence. Contrarily, he also mentions Greene's rule that aloofness can be attractive, implying that a balance is necessary. The conversation moves towards the discussion of the intriguing phenomenon of young male syndrome. Rob describes this as a period of reduced inhibition and increased risk-taking behavior, generally exhibited by young men in their teens and early 20s. It's associated with peaking rates of criminality around age 19, instances of aggressive responses and lashing out, and risky behaviors like drinking and driving, hospitalizations due to accidents, and even crossing the street unsafely. Arguably, this behavior can be viewed as an adaptive evolutionary strategy, wherein physically responding instantly to a provoking situation can advantageously demonstrate strength and assert power. This becomes especially apparent when men are in the presence of other men or women, often resort to portraying themselves as tough and risk-taking to impress their peers or potential mates. For example, men are less likely to wear seatbelts when a male passenger is with them, potentially signaling toughness. Rob introduces the concept of amel-sedation hypothesis, explaining how many young men are spending significant hours absorbed in virtual worlds like MMORPG, massively multiplayer online role-playing games. These individuals could have been potentially involved in real-world mischief, but are instead channeling their energy into online activities, thereby sedating potentially risky behaviors. On the other hand, this does raise questions about the trade-off in mental well-being, social skills, and personal development due to excessive immersion into the virtual realm. In this segment of the podcast, the discussion revolves around the social implications and personal experiences of the young male syndrome. Rob recounts how past societies channeled the aggressive behavior of young men through exploratory activities, such as colonization efforts during Portugal in the 1800s, where excess males were sent on galleon ships to pioneer the New World. And this allowed these individuals to channel their energy and aggression towards a significant cause. And the conversation then shifts to the more modern setting, where rising numbers of young men isolate themselves from societal expectations and engage in virtual activities, phenomenon dubbed as the male sedation hypothesis. Notes that the consequences of this syllable are yet unclear, but they expect an increase in related violence rates. However, current data do not seem to demonstrate this uptick in violence. Instead, it suggests a new problem space. A cohort of jobless and inactive young men who spend significant portions of their time on MMORPGs, pornography, and social media, often coupled with the intake of unhealthy food and substances, including weed and prescription medication. Rob and Chris agree that these men, part of the need, not an education, employment, or training cohort, are essentially withdrawing from the economy and society. The reason behind this is often a lack of motivation and feelings of resentment towards society for not providing them enough rewards or satisfactions. However, Rob notes the issue isn't entirely black and white. There are more desirable alternatives that offer character building experiences. He cites his own experience with military training as an example of how initially challenging environments can mold individuals into better versions of themselves. And the discussion slightly skews from young male behaviors to the spread of victimhood culture, where perceived marginalization and oppression become a form of currency. Chris and Rob also discuss the increasing divergence in society, with people increasingly leaning towards extremes. So on the one hand, there are groups who exhibit passive, timid, and soy behavior. On the other hand, there are groups inspired by figures like David Goggins and Jocko Willink, choosing hardship and self-improvement. The hosts conclude by discussing assortative mating, where individuals choose partners similar to themselves, resulting in socioeconomic clustering. They speculate on how this might exacerbate social inequality due to the anti-genic inheritance that promotes a cycle of advantages for already well-off individuals. As the dialogue proceeds, Chris and Rob delve further into discussions of societal divisions and social inequality. They touch on assortative mating, where individuals tend to select partners who share similar characteristics to themselves. This often leads to a socioeconomic clustering and contributes to the cyclical advantage for the already privileged classes, potentially increasing inequality in society. The conversation then broadens to address an intriguing aspect of contemporary dating. Even if a highly educated man dates a barista at Starbucks, the chances are that she too has a college degree. Paraphrasing the thoughts of Gregory Clark, people find mutual commonality and compatibility in shared psychological attributes and intellectual levels. This forms the reality of assortative mating, hardly affected by present occupational trends and disparities. The discussion also moves onto the spread of victimhood culture, where perceived oppression or marginalization becomes social currency. Our hosts explore how societal divergence leads people towards extremes. Passive and timid or inspired by hardships and self-improvement, demonstrating a substantial societal shift in behaviors and attitudes. Rob Henderson discusses a disturbing statistic regarding the impact of familial instability on educational outcomes. He cites that kids raised in poor families in the US have an 11 graduation rate from college, while for foster kids, it drops to a startling 3. He attributes this difference to disorder and instability, arguing that this issue warrants more extensive attention. Meanwhile, Chris talks about a recent book, The Two-Parent Privilege by Melissa. This book, explains Williamson, focuses on the societal advantage of having two parents and the impact of this family structure on a child's outcome. However, it also sparked a series of online attacks due to its perceived right-wing underpinnings, highlighting the divisiveness and rapidity of judgment present in our society. Towards the end, conversation takes a turn to debunk some popular ideas, specifically the MATE deprivation hypothesis, suggesting that men deprived of mates are more likely to hold misogynistic attitudes. The hosts discuss recent findings that contradict this narrative. Research indicates that men with high levels of sexual partners often hold extreme misogynist views and dominance orientation. These factors, in conjunction with high levels of extroversion and narcissism, render them more attractive, leading to a higher count of consensual sex partners. A more interesting hypothesis emerges from this discussion. Women might instinctively avoid being alone with the stereotypical incel, but may not have the same hesitation with an attractive man raising critical questions about our ingrained societal views. And the dialogue now ventures into new terrains of thought as the host Chris and Rob, alongside their guests, continue to dissect society, particularly looking at the impact of societal perceptions on individuals' behaviors. Chris mentions a study involving over 1,000 voters aged 18 to 34, with a consensus appearing that people found extremism on both the left and right-wing political spectrums to be off-putting when looking for a potential partner. They break down how such political allegiance can affect the romantic relationships of both men and women. Additionally, the importance of status dynamics in social interactions is emphasized, with Chris recounting an experience during a walk with Jordan Peterson in Nashville, highlighting the comet phenomena. Henderson, as a recognizable persona, attracted a tale of humans following him akin to a comet. As they trail behind him, people who initially may not have recognized Peterson become interested due to the attention he's garnering, demonstrating a powerful social dynamic. And so the hosts also delve into some related research by Milgram, where a small group of people looking up at the sky sparks curiosity in onlookers, leading to a crowd forming. They just about the imitative quality of humans, considering it an adaptive behavior that can also sometimes lead to amusing situations. Furthermore, the hosts discuss the divisive impact of prominent societal debates such as the gender identity discussion and the polarization it can cause amongst individuals. A question is stating there are only two genders can be considered an extreme position, reflecting how societal norms and perceptions can evolve over time. Finally, they consider the unexpectedly high percentage of women who found the refusal to see the Barbie movie a red flag. Hence, this humorously yet thoughtfully points to our society's often conflicting nature, where the complexities of gender discussions may become overshadowed by views on a pop culture artifact such as the Barbie movie. In this fascinating continuation of the conversation, the hosts, Chris and Rob, alongside their guest Rob Henderson, delve deeper into political and societal dynamics, especially as they relate to gender. They critically analyze survey data indicating that rather than men, it's young women who are increasingly leaning towards left or far left political ideologies. And they find this trend of radicalization arresting, noting that it doesn't receive as much attention as its counterpart involving young men. The discussion proceeds to touch upon controversial issues like relationship compatibility among couples with stark political leanings. An interesting divergence appears in the relationship preferences of men and women. Some are more receptive to dating women who identify with the self-proclaimed MAGA ethos, whereas women are more comfortable dating men who resonate with communist ideologies. They delve into intriguing details like differences in how men and women perceive issues such as gun ownership and listening to Joe Rogan. What emerges is a clearer picture of societal norms and expectations and how they impact perceptions. Chris and Rob broaden their discussion to examine the fascinating study conducted by Spencer Greenberg on the predictive power of Myers-Briggs versus the Big Five personality model. The indication that Myers-Briggs is only about 18 accurate in foreseeing personality predispositions compared to the Big Five leads to comparing Myers-Briggs to astrology, highlighting its potentially fallible nature. A particularly intriguing observation they discuss is the discovery of higher female status being associated with lower female happiness and relationship satisfaction. This paradoxical observation pushes the conversation forward as they explore how increased wealth, social, political equality among genders, employment pressures, and the escalating need for higher levels of education correlate with levels of happiness. The conclusion is startling, but increasing opportunities and independence, women's happiness might be declining. Firstly, they raise a curious point about men's happiness levels being higher than women's, speculating this might be due to reduced economic pressure on men as compared to times past. This detailed examination opens multiple threads for further exploration, including the intersection of societal expectations and personal happiness. As Chris and Rob uncover the layers of societal and individual dynamics, they introduce the concept of surplus mate value. Using the example of Chris Bumstead, renowned Mr. Olympia Classic physique champion, They suggest that his high status provides an abundance of mate value, which allows him to express vulnerability and depend on his partner. Actions that could otherwise be perceived as weakening his attractiveness. Almost over, the hosts discuss deeper into the concept of counter-signaling, where high-status individuals can afford to behave in ways stereotypical of low-status individuals, thereby solidifying their status further. As Rob references research by Jeffrey Miller, stating that self-deprecating humor from a person of high status can yield admiration, they compare this to men of lower status who can't afford to act similarly, creating an interesting dichotomy. Rob introduces an intriguing study called Too Good for School, demonstrating how professors from more prestigious institutions tend to use fewer titles in their syllabi, again stressing the principle of counter-signaling. This trend also extends to the world of social media, where established personalities may do less self-promotion than those striving to gain traction. The conversation then veers towards the importance of documenting personal journeys. Here, Chris highlights how tracking their path can serve as a reminder of resilience and essentially a benchmark indicative of the growth experienced. This practice not only reinforces the individual's strength, but also can serve as an inspiration to others working their way up their personal ladders. Rob agrees, noting that acknowledging hardships early on leads to credibility, instead of being perceived as embellishing past struggles onto an already successful story. The hosts consider Rob's upcoming book as an instance of such documentation, describing his story of overcoming adverse life circumstances. Thus, the conversation unravels nuances of individual and societal mechanisms revolving around status, humility, resilience, and personal journeys. The hosts, Chris and Rob, delve into the concept of concealed ovulation, using evolutionary theory to discuss the observable reproductive patterns in humans compared to other ape species. They may speculate that perhaps human evolution led to concealed ovulation so that women could disguise their fertile periods. This, they believe, could be an evolutionary adaptation to reduce the risk of sexual coercion or paternity uncertainty. Rob further empowers this idea by discussing the recent study called Too Good for School. He refers to findings that suggest concealed ovulation might also have served as a self-protective mechanism for women. If women were aware of their cycles and could predict their likelihood of becoming pregnant, they might strategically avoid sex during fertile periods to eschew the dangers and burdens of pregnancy. This conversation leads the hosts to the paradoxical concept of ovulation misfiring. They cite research which indicates that intense social and physical stress in women can cause ovulation to misfire, effectively messing up the menstrual cycle. Drawing on these studies, the hosts invite contemplation on the deeper implications of concealed ovulation, such as triggering pair bonding behaviors owing to increased sexual activity for conception due to the uncertainty of the fertile period. Next, the spotlight is turned towards Solomon's paradox, a psychological phenomenon where people can be wiser when solving other people's problems rather than their own. They cite an example of a behavioral economics game called the Ultimatum game, where people tended to make more economically rational decisions on behalf of friends than for themselves. This led to an intriguing discussion of how this paradox could be affecting younger people who have less social interaction, further exacerbating loneliness and making unwise personal decisions due to lack of external perspectives. Moving forward, they relate this to the social isolation trend among youths nowadays, emphasizing how isolationist decision-making could contribute not only to feelings of loneliness, but also to less than optimal life decisions. And the host underscores that a good support network would lead to better decisions and eventually to a better and more sociable lifestyle. Then moving forward, they apply this concept to modern reality by citing the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. They note how the recent versions of the game reflect this paradox where contestants bring smart friends as lifelines for support in making decisions. And they conclude that in a world where social interactions are becoming more digital, the lack of smart friends to consult could hinder personal growth and development. The hosts, Chris and Rob, further delve into social dynamics discussion with focus laid on isolationist retreats for men versus women. They speculate a distinct lack of counterpart for women in this case, implied to be perhaps due to women owning stickier social networks compared to men. Supporting the hypothesis, Rob cites a book about the psychology of friendship, pointing out how women are generally better at staying in touch, organizing gatherings, and maintaining relationships. They take this analysis a step ahead by citing an interesting social dynamic. The angle at which men and women talk in a party. Women, they observe, talk to each other face to face, while men's conversations occur at a slight angle. An obscure pattern now, coined as the face-to-face versus shoulder-to-shoulder dichotomy. They then connect this observation with the Amen Sheds initiative in Australia, an initiative aimed at improving men's mental health. The hosts admire the concept of the initiative, where men come together to fix things like a dysfunctional lawnmower, emphasizing how such an approach leads to indirect therapy sessions and release of emotional repression, the shoulder-to-shoulder communication working here. Drawing on their personal experiences and observations, Chris and Rob then narrate intriguing anecdotes about discussions they've had during sports or warm-ups, and how they've witnessed men opening up after engaging in some activity. And they point out the unique friendship dynamics in both genders, indicating how women tend to maintain their networks, nudging their male counterparts to stay in touch with their friends. In contrast, men, particularly during breakups, tend to lose not just their female partners, but also their friend circles. They emphasize that men's friendships deepen rapidly when they are part of a project or a shared mission, aligning with their observation of men needing an activity to deepen their bonds. And Rob presents another interesting perspective about the rapid turnover of male friendships. Based on several studies, he suggests an interesting possibility. This friendship turnover might be more common among men because their friendships often stem from solving problems together. Once the problem is solved, they move on, leaving room for new friendships. The hosts then continue their dialogue over the several aspects of modern wisdom, from the mental health initiatives to the tricky dynamics of friendships.